dia. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. The first time I was here as part of the World Nuclear University was 10 years ago, so it's very exciting, and that's why now we already have many friends here, and I'm so happy to be here. Not to mention that I come from Canada, and today it's a nice spring day there, 5 degrees and sunny. So I prefer to be on the beach. Now, what we're going to talk about in the next session is very exciting because it's something you're all interested in. We're going to talk about money. And I know everybody's interested in money, and we're going to take some perspectives on how to make nuclear better, and I think you'll get some good perspectives both from myself and the following two speakers. So, one of the things I like to talk about is we need to use the word success. How do we measure success in this industry? So often we talk about risks and concerns and things we worry about. But one of the many challenges to expanding the use of nuclear power, there's really none greater than getting the costs right. You know, it's easy to talk about we have challenges with public acceptance and we need low carbon generation, but really only a cost competitive industry can really achieve our full potential. And that's up to us, right? That's under our control as an industry. Now, nuclear plants, as you know, are capital intensive with relatively long project schedules, and that, as a result, their costs are very sensitive to the capital cost and the cost of capital, or the cost of money. And that's what I want to focus on today. How can we make those things better? So we'll look at some strategies, because this is a short talk, so we'll just focus on some strategies to say, how should we think about things? Now, part of it is what we're informed by is some recent experience. You know, Agnieszka just talked about how some plants are 50 years old. Well, I'm proud to say that I just had my 60th birthday, and so I'm hoping to still contribute for more years. But we still have to be learning. And one of the things we're learning from is the recent experience in the UK with both the Hinkley Point and the Horizon projects. And also, I am doing the independent oversight in Canada for our refurbishment of the Darlington nuclear plant, which is a huge life extension project that's $12 billion. So we're learning a lot about how we have to continue to innovate on the financial side and on the project side. Now, just to talk about economics in general, it's hard to find a consensus on what the numbers are. I took this out of the 2018 World Energy Outlook by the International Energy Agency, and what you can see is that nuclear is the red line, that in most parts of the world, nuclear is reasonably competitive with all the other options. It's not surprising that in the US you see it being higher because they're having higher capital costs. But generally, I think there is a consensus that there's no reason a nuclear plant can't be competitive with most other forms of generation. Now, this is an interesting chart as well. It comes out of a recent study by MIT, because what MIT tried to do is they looked at different jurisdictions around the world and said, if we want to fully decarbonize an energy system or an electricity system from a 500 gram per kilowatt hour system with fossil fuels to one without, how can we do that assuming we only have wind and solar and storage, or do we add nuclear to the mix? Now, that's not directly relevant to here because in Brazil, as in Canada, of course, we have a lot of hydraulic resources. But the interesting thing here is that it shows that even though nuclear plants may be a little bit more costly, if you want to go to a fully decarbonated system, if you try and do it all with wind and solar and storage, it's going to be much more expensive than nuclear. And those are two nuclear scenarios. But what's really more interesting is the impact to your system. What you can see, this is looking at the New England states. In the States, but in the MIT study, they have UK, they have China, they have many things. You can see that in order to fully decarbonize your system with variable renewables, the size of your system has to grow by almost a factor of 10. And so this is extremely difficult, as you can imagine, and it also takes away from that sort of fantasy that we have that wind and solar are very small and local and easy. I mean, the system would have to grow, in this case, from something like 36 gigawatts to 400 gigawatts because you don't know when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining. So that gives you some context. Let's move on. This comes from the projected cost of electricity from the OECD, which is now 5 years old. So the absolute numbers are not what's important. What's important to understand is the sensitivity of nuclear plant energy costs to both the cost of capital, nuclear is the blue line in this case, and the capital cost. And you can see that both parameters are very, very sensitive. And that's important because we often talk about the capital cost, but we forget that the cost of capital, or in other words, the interest rate you pay on your money, is a very big factor. Why is it a big factor? Because our project schedules are relatively long, so a lot of interest accumulates. So I've come up with a little model on how we can manage costs, a three-corner approach to how we can manage costs and try and be better going forward. And I'm sure the next speaker will be telling you a lot of good evidence on this subject. So really what I want to do is look at three things. Let's make sure we can build projects on time, on budget. And that doesn't mean only standard plants or 10th of a kind, first of a kind, Angra 3 when you restart it. All projects can be built to time and budget if we plan properly. Then let's focus on the two other options. How do we reduce the cost of capital, and how do we reduce the capital cost? So first, how do we build to cost and schedule? And to sum it up in one word, it sounds simple: be prepared. Most people start projects and they're just not sufficiently prepared. They make commitments without having sufficient work done so that they have good cost estimates and good plans that they can deliver to. So plan, and plan some more. The previous speaker spoke to the planning, and you can see how important that is. Ensure adequate design completion before construction. You can't have a cost estimate if you don't have your engineering done. Now the third one is very important because that's where some recent projects have gone wrong. You have to have your supply chain ready. If they haven't built in a long time, you need to make sure you have time to work with them so they can deliver. You have to have strong project metrics. You can't have reporting of what I like to call what I did on my summer vacation. You know, last week, it was a good week. We finished A, we started B. You know, it has to be, we were supposed to do this, and either we did it or we didn't. Because metrics give you the true reality of your project. You have to have a strong risk management program, right? Nothing worries me more than when people in a big project come and say, the risk is all behind us, don't worry. I'd much rather they say we understand the risks that are ahead of us and we have a good plan for how to mitigate these risks if and when they happen. And then we'll talk about it more on the next slide. You have to have a project financial structure that supports allowing you to get ready early. One of the problems we have in some of the private models that we talk about is nobody can afford to spend enough money at the beginning of the project to really get ready before they have to make a commitment. On the Darlington refurbishment project that I'm working on, they spent 3 years and $3 billion on planning and preparing the site and on campus plan improvements. And when they got approval to do the rest of the project, the additional $9 billion, it's because the estimates were solid, the plan was good. Better to make a decision and lose some investment at the beginning than not finish on time. And finally, as we heard before, this industry is all about people. You have to have the best people you can. On the project I'm involved in, more than once they've pushed the contractor to replace senior people. Very often we talk about having enough resources, we mean, you know, electrician or boilermaker, trades, engineers. The reality is, for projects to succeed, you need the best senior project leaders. And those are hard to find, and we need to do better to develop those people. Now, when we go to reducing the cost of capital, this is a chart that caught my eye and changed my thinking. This comes from a study by the National Accountability Office in the UK when they did a review of, National Audit Committee. They did a review of the Hinkley Point C project. And the Hinkley Point C project, as you know, is a privately owned, or it's a contract for difference, where a cost of energy is provided by EDF Energy, who's building the plant and will sell energy into the system. What this shows is that the cost of energy at 92.5 pounds has a rate of return somewhere around here. And then they showed if you do different models, all the way down to a public model where it has a very low government rate of return, the price of energy can be anywhere between 90 and 0. Now, don't ask me why 0, I can explain it later because we don't have much time, but it shows you that for the same price of the plant, the cost of building that plant doesn't change. Just having different rate of return to the investors can have a huge impact. And so what that has to do is make you think, am I getting value when I transfer risk? And am I getting sufficient value? It's not saying you should do a public model. It's just saying, let's make sure we really understand the value we're getting. So as the project owner, the thing we've learned, it's your project, it's your risk. You can't get rid of it. You can think you get rid of it. I'm sure George will talk about this, but in reality, you can't. When you think you're putting all the risk onto the vendor, you're not. You're transferring risk as a tool to manage risk. You're not really transferring it because, as you can see by that nice little picture, there is no scenario under which your contractor fails and you succeed. Right? Never happens. It's your project, you're going to run it for 40 years, you're building it because you need it, and that means you have to have control and full vision into your project. Even if you get a lump sum or a lot of risk onto your vendor, you have to be able to see through, because you can't wait for the vendor who's struggling in some cases, but keeps thinking they can solve it. You know, they think, I can solve it, I can solve it, I can solve it. Uh-oh, big problem. Much better if at the beginning, when they have a small problem, you all get involved and try to solve it. Because this goes back to that word we have to use, success. The objective is not to figure out who to blame when the project fails, because if you think the project's going to fail, don't do it. Do something else, you know. Spend your life more productively, right? If you think what you need to do is all be focused on project success. And then the final cornerstone is how do we get the cost of a plant down? And I'm sure we'll hear more about this from the next speakers. It's very simple, standardization, build and repeat. We all know that when we do things over and over again, we get better at it. Right? And standardization goes beyond design. When a lot of people think about standard plants, they think it's a standard design. No, in the UAE, when they built 4 plants next to each other, it's because they used the same person welding the same pipe 4 times, the same design, the same supply chain, the same project manager. So the more you can repeat, the better it will be. And of course, there's a limit, right? You can repeat a lot at the same site, more in the same country, less as you go from country to country. But, you know, as the next speaker will show, he's the one that can bring that expertise from country to country, but it's not 100% because you have to localize and things like that. So it's very important, and the reason we say that, is because it's, again, all about people. You know, very often in utilities, when they talk about lessons learned program, which is how you maintain knowledge, it's a big database. But knowledge is not enough. You need the same people who touched it before to touch it again. Just imagine, these days we're very lucky. When in our home we need to fix something, we don't have to know how to do it. We go on YouTube and we find a video, and the video shows us how to do whatever project we want to do. But of course the benefit is it's fantastic, but we still know it's easier when we do it the second time, right? Once you've done it the first time, you learn something. Now the last point I want to make, and that, see, I've not gone over time. The last point I want to make is that people say, well, what about innovation? Can we still innovate and standardize? And I think the answer is yes. Because by having a standardized approach, you can manage innovation. You can say, okay, next project, here's 5 or 10 things we're going to do that are improvements, and we're going to focus our energy on them and do them right. And we have to remember, innovation is about making improvements. It's not novelty. People think of innovation as, oh, well, instead of a PWR, we're going to build a salt reactor, or we're going to build a fast reactor. That's not innovation. Innovation is, oh, when we built it last time, now we have drones, and we're going to send them up to inaccessible places, and they're going to help us laser map so we can have an easier time installing things. Innovation is we have new tools that give us an easier way to do something. Or we learned something as we were doing the project before that maybe now someone has an idea, how can we do something better? So anyway, keep that in mind. So just to summarize, what we can do as an industry to improve the cost of nuclear is we can focus on what we control. And what we control can lead to lower and predictable nuclear plant costs. They can be achieved, and we must do it to have the bright future that Agneta showed us. So basically what you need to do is be ready, manage risk, build and repeat, but continue to innovate. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much for your attention.